Well, let's see. Welcome back to the program. Glad you're with us this morning. It is, of course, now time for St. Maarten Insights, news that matters to you. My good friend Emil Lee is in the studio. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm great. Good morning, listeners. Great to be here again.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to see you. And so, listen, next week I am in Jamaica.
Hmm.
So we can't do next week.
Correct.
Sorry
And
about that.
and I'm off island as well. I'm
Oh.
actually doing my first cruise.
Where are you cruising to?
The Western Caribbean, so
Oh,
Mexico,
oh,
that
cool.
side. So
And are you going to Miami and then
Cape
cruising?
Cape Canaveral and then down. So
Oh,
my
cool.
first time. Yes.
Cool. Be prepared to eat, apparently. What cruise line do you know? You can't- Royal?
Royal.
Royal?
I don't know.
Well,
One of the nicer ones.
okay.
Oasis.
No, that's one of the big ones. Yeah,
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 one of the big. It's a
yeah.
monster ship.
Yeah,
So.
that'll be super cool, super cool stuff. Well, enjoy.
Well, Sebastian likes it, my son. So for him, it's great because he can just kind of run around. You don't have to worry about, if he
But,
gets lost.
well, he can't really listen. If he gets lost, there's only a fixed amount of
Exactly,
space.
exactly. So he loves the freedom that he gets there. That's so he wanted to do it.
Love it, love it, love it, love it. Um, so could we? I want to talk about something that's been
Sure,
kind
you
of
mentioned.
bothering me. So, there's been lots of discussion, and I know that the Minister of Rami was in court last week, I believe.
Hmm.
And there's big discussion about Mullet Bay
Hmm.
because it's my understanding that Sun Resorts, which is I think it's Sun Resorts,
I think it's the holding company
yeah,
for the whole
for the whole
property.
thing, right?
Right, right.
That has the deed to the property.
Hmm.
Um, that deed at the time, when you look at the survey that was done,
Hmm.
the Met briefs, the actual physical maps, right, go all the way down to the high water mark and how it was measured out, which is very unique in how beachfront land is you know I guess the beach itself is
So,
generally public.
so I'm gonna say, I don't know the details at all about Mullet Bay.
Hmm.
But what I can tell you is that the same thing happened at Dawn Beach.
Hmm.
So in other words, that it's, I think, a fairly common thing that they use the water line as a line,
The high water
as
mark.
a reference line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because like in the U.S., right?
Well, and it's important because the setback lines. So normally, what happens is Romy sets a code that says you can only build within, I don't know the distance, but let's say 20 meters from the high water line,
right,
right? So in the past, that high water line would be in the water today.
right,
And so what it's allowed, at least in what I've seen in Don Beach, is it's allowed the developers to build the buildings much, much closer to the current water line,
mm,
which is of course good for them from a developmental point of view. They have more real estate that they can develop, and
right,
they're really on the water, right? But as you know, the
right,
the lines change, and the bigger issue is with hurricanes now, they're
right. So
they're in trouble
so
sometimes.
so in the U.S., right? The
Mm-hmm.
way so I owned beachfront property in Connecticut,
Mm-hmm.
and the the way that our property line went from this point to this point, east and west, from the street on the north side, and then the south was bordered by Long Island Sound,
Mm-hmm.
and the southern property line was the mean high water mark. Um, so in other words, it changed a little over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so so if you were to, so the way you figure that out, right, is if you were to go out and go out 100 meters from the shore, 200 meters from the shore, right, and drive a pole straight down and shoot a line towards the shore, right,
Mm-hmm.
and where that straight, from the top of the water towards the shore, where that line um, meets land, um, and that is the high water mark, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you calculate over time, it, what the high water mark is and the distance, right? You come up with the mean, the average high water mark.
Hmm.
Um, so I mean that's how they and your property line changes. Sometimes it's a little longer, sometimes a little shorter, depending on the average high water mark. Um, so what my understanding is that in Mullet Bay, the when they did the
The meat briefs.
they included to the high water mark,
Hmm.
which changes,
As
right?
as part of the land.
Right, as part of what
What?
the holding company owned,
Okay.
which is unusual
Hmm.
for waterfront beachfront property on St. Maarten because the beaches are, other than in the scenario that we're talking about, um, are public, right? They're not
Correct.
owned by a private entity.
Right.
Um, and I like the fact that all of our beaches are public. Don't get me wrong.
Hmm.
Um, but what bothers me, what concerns me, is that if in fact that the property rights of the holding company that own Mullet Bay, the operation, the holding company, right? If their legal documents and their surveys from when they bought the property show that they own to the high water mark, if we turn around and say in court, no, you don't, that creates a real problem for us because that means that property rights are subject to the interpretation of the judge, not what you bought at the time that you bought it. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem for St. Maarten because now we're saying, what's recorded at the cadastre in the land records, well, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. If somebody wants to object, we can go to court and the judge gets to decide.
Hmm.
That's a
Hmm.
bad precedent for the island from a real estate perspective. Not just investors, but everyone who owns a home here.
So you're
So what?
saying that if the deed says the property line is actually, for argument's sake, in the water, right? It's extended now into the water because of erosion, whatever.
Mhm.
You're saying that that
Well,
portion of
no,
the
no.
beach should be owned by whoever.
What I'm suggesting is if the water line is the property line, right? Where the water line is changes, right?
Right. That's right.
So I'm okay with that. But if we now say, oh, by the way, we should have never given you ownership to the water line, we're now going to back that up 300, 100, 500 feet.
Hmm.
To I have a problem with that because I think that's what happened in Oyster. You said Oyster
In
Bay,
Don Beach.
Dawn Beach.
Well, so indeed, the historically, when people were, in the old days when they were making deeds for land, they used to say from the tamarind tree to the soursap tree
Yeah,
and to the rock wall, and so they used physical markers
right.
as boundaries for properties, right? That's in the old days how it used to be done. And indeed, they used water lines very often as one of the, if it was beachfront property, they
Right.
used water lines
And
as
and
a marker.
the water line is still the water line. It might be in a different spot, but the water line is the water line.
Right.
It's the same thing
So
like they
here,
did with
yeah. So here's the tricky thing, right? So okay, you say it's the water line. For sure, if over time, for example, let's just imagine that sediment built up and the water line moved into the water, 20 meters.
it's still the water line.
But you could be sure that the property owners, developers would say, hey, I actually need to move my boundary because the water line is now further away, right? They would make the argument that that land should be mine.
Well, no,
And if the reverse happens, then
I would make the argument the water line, wherever the water line happens to be, is the property line. Just like I had said to you in the U.S., right? It's
but
the
so
my
devil's
board.
advocate,
Yeah.
suppose they fill it in themselves.
Well, that's where the government needs to regulate, and you're not allowed to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So I totally understand the discussion about legal ownership of the land. But, what I've seen, for example, and I've seen this in Don Beach, is the consequence of having a property line that's actually in the water is that the setback lines for construction are determined by distance from that property line, not wherever the current water line is. So I've seen it where the water line is a good 20, 30 feet into the water. The boundary line is now a good 20 or 30 feet in the water. So the buildings have come and encroached very close to the beach, right? Which means that public space is smaller. By the time they put beach chairs, although it's public, you don't really feel that welcome.
But here's where I disagree with you.
Mm.
If the boundary is the water line, right?
No, the problem is, at least what I've seen in Don Beach, is the boundary is actually now technically in the water. They haven't adjusted. They haven't said the boundary lines in.
But what does what does the original survey and the Met brief say? Does it say the that would be the of Don Beach, that would be the easterly boundary is the water line, or does it list a physical location?
So originally it's so I'm going from memory, so don't quote me, but so originally I believe it was based on water line, but as things became modernized, they put a physical line, and that physical line actually ended up basically in the water now.
But that's the mistake, right? Your boundary is the water line.
So the consequence is buildings now are built much closer to the shore, and we live in a hurricane zone. And so when those properties get heavily damaged because they're actually too close to and have water surge problems, in the end, all of us end up paying through higher insurance premiums. Our tourism infrastructure gets destroyed. So, I mean, there's multiple sides to this discussion, right? There's the legal side, which I totally get what you're saying, but then there's the economic and common sense questions about look at Orient Beach, right? Remember, after the hurricane, a lot of those restaurants were damaged, and the whole process to rebuild was a fairly complicated process. I mean, I remember the businesses there complaining about it, but if you see now, they have a wide section from the physical structures to the shoreline. I think sometimes you do have to make those hard decisions.
Right, but that's it. This is a different topic, right? If I am granted, if my deed says I own this piece of property, whether it's on the water or not, right? If I own this piece of property,
right,
and you change what I own because of where it is, that makes my deed worthless.
Right.
It creates real issues for everyone that lives here, whether it's a waterfront piece of property or not. It means the court can decide whether you own what you've paid for and what has been deeded to you or not. And that's a problem. That's a problem for all of us. And so, I hope that cooler minds will prevail. I mean, there are solutions to this, right? If in fact that, and there's a big presumption, right, that's what I'm saying is true, right? But there's a big presumption that if that original survey was set all the way to the water line and is owned by the Mullet Bay organization, if that's in fact true, it needs to be honored, right? That's the deed that's recorded. Doesn't mean I like it, right? But what the government needs to come up with a way to do is to organize with the owner of that property so public access is always been available.
Right.
Right. And so
it sounds like indeed there needs to be more clarity on building code and also that public access, right?
Right.
How do you maintain sufficient public access?
Right, and what is sufficient?
Right.
I mean, I can use Simpson Bay Beach as an example, right? All along the beachfront, because I live there, right? All along the beachfront, all pretty much private homes and condos, few hotels, few restaurants, but not many, right? But there are a number of, at the end of every street, whether it's Williams Drive or Halley Drive, or
there's access.
There's access to the beach.
Right.
Now people, they have to remember when you drive down the street, right, and the street actually ends at the beach. and there are homes on either side, that's somebody lives there, right? So if you're going to go use that as public access to the beach, by all means use it as public access to the beach, but clean up after yourself. And remember that behind the concrete wall of the house could be someone's bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
So just be courteous, right?
And also, I mean, again, we talk about access, but imagine if all of the parking in your neighborhood, all the public parking dries up, right? If there's no way to park anywhere close to that public access, how accessible is it really?
Well, and listen, we have these problems all the time where
Right,
people will literally park in front of my driveway gate and
right,
think it's okay.
right,
So I'm just going to the beach. Yes, but you can't block my driveway.
right,
Go
right,
park out on the main road.
right.
There's tons of room.
So that's where these kinds of things need a little bit more attention.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we digress. We digress. What time is it? It's 8:20. Let me take a quick commercial break. We'll come back, learn what happened in Council Minister's press briefing yesterday. More St. Maarten Insights news that matters to you with Emil Lee is on the way. Please stick around. Well, good morning, Devo. Of course, St. Maarten Insights news that matters to you, 827. And we were talking off air.
Right.
Um,
So I think indeed, regardless of how the
and this is the whole Mullet Bay discussion, right?
right, so the issue really is about property lines that are beachfront, and as beaches are moving in and out, what happens to that property line? And so indeed, regardless of whatever happens in the court case regarding Mullet Bay, um, there's the bigger issue about if government in its building code properly regulates what structures can be built, how they need to be built,
The height
especially
of
when
the
they're
height of the
coastal.
yeah, the
Right,
height of the first floor, all of those things,
right.
right, are all zoning
So,
issues.
so, and this is a huge issue. And again, this is from what I remember after Irma happened on the French side. So imagine that you have a property, a coastal property before Hurricane Irma. Properties, let's say a 2 million euro property because you're beachfront, right? You're in a good financial position. Irma comes, your property gets destroyed.
Hmm.
And then the government says, well, hang on, we're going to reevaluate the zoning, the regulations about coastal properties, and then determines that your property is not in a safe zone anymore. If you remember after Irma, they used to have these maps on the French side with sort of prohibited zones now. And so imagine now that your 2 million euro house, the government decides, well, no, you can't rebuild because it's too close. You can't even sell the property because how are you going to sell it, because you can't build anything on it, right? So the property value just
Yeah.
plummeted, right? So it turned into a very big issue. And if I understand well, I mean, that's why if you see, if when you drive through Grand Cas, some of those places have never been rebuilt, I think, exactly for these types of discussions. So as climate changes, these are real discussions that we need to have. And for example, for Mullet Bay, a property that's not really developed yet, those discussions need to happen now.
Right.
So regardless of whatever the legal dispute is, the zoning issues for beachfront property is something that needs attention quickly, especially because I think the property's up for sale. So people, if there's these discussions going on, developers are going to make their plans and get their building permits as fast as possible. So
Yeah, so it really is, so in the case where something gets destroyed by a storm, right?
mm-hmm,
And you own a piece of property,
mm-hmm.
um, I think to a certain degree, you have to set new requirements. And I know the French side, there's huge issues still on the French
Yes,
side because they actually just went and said no,
right,
right?
right.
And I don't think that's an appropriate answer. I think the real answer is you can rebuild. However, you're
The
subject.
standards have changed.
The
Yes,
standards have now changed.
yes.
Um, or your first floor must be elevated to a certain height.
But
You have
remember,
to,
the French side, I think they have some sort of like governmental insurance as well, right? So imagine that the French then say, okay, fine, you need to build to these standards, but I will not insure your property
right,
anymore, right? That becomes
right.
a different financial issue, because
What's a
then
different discussion?
then can you get a mortgage if you can't get insurance, right? Those types of, so it's a complicated discussion, very complicated.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's go and touch a little bit on Council of
L-
Ministers.
Let's do that. Let me do this. We'll stay on time. First time ever. Here's everything that's happened tonight. More for St. Maarten Insights news that matters to you in just a bit. Welcome back to the program. Glad you're with us. Remember tonight, we're at Fat Tony's Pork Chop Night tonight at Fat Tony's. Time for more St. Maarten Insights news that matters to you with Emil Lee. What happened at Council of Ministers, sir?
So yesterday I was the only journalist there. I always find that very interesting because it becomes much more conversational
Mm.
versus when there's other journalists, right? So
So who
I
was there?
enjoy.
Who was there from government?
So the Minister of Romy, Justice, and Tiat.
Okay.
So three ministers. So it was good. So so there was a lot of things, a lot of ground that we covered because of that. So number one, talked a little bit about the dump. So Patrice and his Minister Gums in his opening was talking about the landfill, and one of the issues they have is that like different neighborhoods, they have dumpsters where people are bringing their garbage, right? But you're not supposed to drop anything large there, but people are dropping off like old furniture, refrigerators, things like that.
Mm.
And so we got into a discussion about um, what you're supposed to do with your garbage. And keep in mind that at the landfill, they're talking about putting in a fee of 10 guilders per time that a vehicle goes in. So I asked, suppose I bring a big truck with things or I come with my little pickup, no, the same 10 guilders. So indeed, I understand why, people, if they have a refrigerator to bring to the dump, it means they have to have a truck or rent a truck to bring it to the dump. So there's additional expense. It's just cheaper for them just to, drop it by the dumpster. And eventually they disappear, right? Somebody eventually, even though it's not legal, they take them and they throw them away. So, and I'm afraid that when they put the fee at the dump, that people are going to actually start dumping more things because they're trying to avoid any extra costs. So they have to work on their enforcement. And he acknowledges that. That's something that government needs to work on. If you put a fee there, you need to work on enforcement. The thing is, and I remember from my time that when I was a minister, the minister of Romy at the time actually put people at the borders to monitor the amount of trucks with waste coming from the French side over to the Dutch side, right? So they were trying to get a sense of what's happening in terms of French garbage because the French dump, there is a fee.
Hmm.
So what happens, and I asked if that's still happening, and the minister confirmed that it's still happening, is that trucks, haulers may pick up garbage on the French side, but then because it's free to dump it on the Dutch side, they just bring it over and dump it on the Dutch side. So, we end up with, garbage from the French side because there's no enforcement. So when you say you're going to put a fee per truck to go to the landfill and you need to work on enforcement, like, enforcement is one of the things that government struggles with the most here, right? So pretty kind of skeptical about how this is all going to play out.
Well, so to me it actually brings a bigger question, right? Because you know, think about you and I both grew up in Connecticut,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And depending on the town that you lived in, um, your garbage collection, um, trash collection was either part of was something the town did, or you paid for a service to come, every once a week to pick up your stuff and dispose of it. So I'll give you like in Milford and Seymour, where I grew up, and I think it was probably different in Woodbridge where you
Mm-hmm.
grew up,
Mm-hmm.
but in Milford and Seymour, it was part of one of the services that the town offered. Every neighborhood had a day of the week where it was your turn to put your stuff out. You'd put your pail out at
Yeah.
the end of the driveway, um, and then you'd put your recycling bin out next to it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it was the same day, sometimes it was different. And they would come on that day and pick up your trash and take it away. And it was part of your property taxes, right? It
Mm-hmm.
was included. Now in Orange, where my cousin Amy lives and where I spend time when I'm in Connecticut, where I have the studio in Connecticut, it's not part of the services the town of Orange offers. You have two choices. You can either hire a service to come once a week and pick up your stuff, both recycling and regular, and you pay so much a year to do that. Or you can choose to bring it to the town to the landfill yourself.
Right.
If you bring it to your and I think if you prove that you are a resident of the town in Orange, then you're not charged to bring things.
Mm-hmm.
So you're paying for the convenience of it being at the end of your driveway. My point is this, and it's the taxpayers that pay for the landfill, um, and the maintenance of the landfill and all of that. But what I struggle with is here, I think our real problem is deeper than just the landfill itself, because the physical landfill is the problem, right? We
Mm-hmm.
need to figure out how to properly dispose of things and where it should be. Um, but the real issue is how we fund it, right? Because there is no property tax system on St. Maarten.
Mm-hmm.
And
So eventually they're going to go to tipping fees. So based on the size of the vehicle that's bringing the garbage to the dump, they will charge the trucks to dump, which means indeed that free household pickup that you have now, right? Everyone just gets a bin, puts it by the road, and somebody magically takes your garbage away, right? That, I think, is what's going to change, right? So eventually you're going to have to pay to have your garbage removed.
and so the question then becomes, how do you manage that and how do you enforce that?
Exactly.
Because if I leave a bin at the end of the street that belongs to my house,
Mm-hmm.
how do I stop someone from putting stuff in my bin?
And that's what I think is going to happen exactly. As you make that as you put fees in place, some of the population is going to avoid the fee by just putting their garbage over somebody else's wall, or just,
Right.
dropping it on the side of the road in a bag somewhere, or maybe not even in a bag, right?
Right.
Or
Yeah,
so
so it to me it seems like we need to spread and I'm not a fan of taxes.
mm,
Layered taxes are better. But when you hit the 50% tax bracket pretty quickly on Dutch St. Martin, um, I think 47% I think is the top tax bracket last time I looked.
mm.
Um, what do you get for that?
And you know what?
Nothing.
And, and to me, you're going to have to look at the fact that if you want the system to be somewhat fair, if you recycle, right? If you separate your paper, your glass, your plastics, and you reduce your garbage because you compost, whatever measures you do to be environmentally responsible at home, and therefore you produce less waste, are you still going to pay the same amount for your garbage? So eventually it should be some sort of based on volume or weight or something. So I'm going to encourage you to generate less waste because you pay less for your garbage. So I don't know. It's a complicated discussion, and so far it sounds like there's still a long way to go in terms of figuring out the strategy. If you remember, and this is something that sort of irritates me, is they've already decided they're going to close off the dump, right? They're going to cap the dump. This is one of the recovery fund projects, I believe. But they haven't decided where the new dump will go. I'm like, how do you decide I'm going to, demolish my house when I don't know where I'm going to move, right? It's a
Right.
very tough discussion. I don't understand it. So that's something we'll keep up with. Another point I asked him, because our prime minister, I haven't seen him for quite some time in press. I asked about the status of the purchase of the new generators. Remember, Holland gave us, I
Oh,
don't know, what, $40-50 million to buy new generators. And the minister deferred.
which minister? Rami?
Vromi.
Rami?
Because I asked him, because in the past, GB used to fall under Vromi, right? So
Right.
it's a little, but nonetheless, you're a member of the Council of
You
Ministers.
used to have an insight, right?
You have to know, right?
Right.
And he said, I'm going to defer that to the prime minister to answer. So I think, I don't know, that sort of irritated me. You know what the reality is.
No one's ordered anything.
That to me, that means the generators have not been ordered, indeed. And if you remember, there was money that Holland allocated to, I think, the Dutch Caribbean, anyways, Aruba, Curacao, St. Martin,
Yeah.
for sustainable energy development, right? And so I asked, because someone brought this up to me, and it was a very interesting topic. The generators at GB are from a company, Wartsila.
Mm-hmm.
And Wartsila apparently has a system that produces fresh water as a byproduct of operating together with the generators. So whatever, the heat, the energy, the waste produced from the electrical diesel generators produces fresh water. Versus our current system, the Seven Seas, they have a reverse osmosis plants, several of them across the island. And from what I understood, that is one of the largest energy consumers for GB. They're the one who purchase the most energy out of all of the different businesses on the island. So here you would produce fresh water as a byproduct of power generation, right? And
Seems like a win-win.
seems like a win-win. Seems like something that would fit under that project, but apparently something that hasn't been considered. So he said, "Okay, I will take it under consideration," and so we'll keep bringing that up. But he did say one of the things they're looking at is something I saw that they are doing in Curacao. It's grid level storage. So the same Wärtsilä produces basically a giant battery that you plug into your power grid, and so it, just like your batteries at home, your solar system will charge up the batteries so that I guess it manages the sort of ups and downs in terms of your demand. So instead of the generator sort of revving up and revving down, it would allow you to manage your energy flows better. And the other thing, of course, is, and we've had this discussion about solar generation, putting it back into the grid, right? So for GB, if they had grid level storage, they could, instead of you having batteries, your neighbor having batteries, right? There's one big battery for the island, and then you could store the power there, which they could then use for the hours where there's no sun. So I think that's something interesting. I saw that they've done that in Curacao, and apparently that's one of the projects that they're looking at funding here.
The thing that is still so interesting to me, and I'm going to pull up some real data as it relates to solar. If you give me 30 seconds, if I can find the one I want, just talk amongst yourselves. I'll find it. Oh yeah. Anyway, the fact of the matter is, we have the ability to produce. Um, we have the ability to store solar, we have the ability to export solar back to the grid, extra power back to the grid. I'll give you, for instance. So during the month of, let's see, this was from March 13th through April 14th. I sent 131.66 kilowatt hours back to the grid that GB got for free.
Right.
And then they turned around and sold those at full rate.
Right. And
I got nothing for it.
I suspect you're not the only one who does that, right?
Yeah, there's everybody's doing it, right?
Right.
And the notion that we should be, GB could take a lot of the edge off, right? And encourage people to invest in solar without the batteries, right?
Right. Which is the biggest expense.
Which is the biggest expense.
Right. The panels are fairly cheap these days.
Right. Like 150, 160 bucks, 175 bucks a panel. The mount's a little more, right? But you could encourage people to invest in solar and send their excess back to you. Pay them something for it. You eliminate the amount of running of your generators, less fuel, even if it's 2 or 3%. 2 or 3% on margin is a lot. Is a lot. Give them 50 cents on the dollar, for what they give you back. The bill will go down a little bit. You'll get free power to sell it first at top full rate.
Right.
It makes complete sense, but not apparently to GB.
I did bring up as well about the road maintenance. Sucker Garden has the big hole that they just put sand in it. He says, there's a problem with the base. They need to. It's going to be apparently a whole big project. You mentioned about here in Simpson Bay.
Simpson Bay is a mess. Sunset is a mess.
Yeah. So they said,
area.
Apparently, they're going to go back to using cold patch for filling the holes, which our experience is that that's not the longest lasting solution. It is really a patch.
Well, it's a patch, and
Yeah.
you have to do the patch the right way. You just
Mhm.
can't dump it in the hole and expect it to last. You got to clean up the hole. You got to make the edges clean, make it flat.
But
Uh,
apparently, that's going to be the interim solution, cold patch.
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
so for listeners, that's basically those bags of asphalt that you buy in the hardware
At
stores.
Koi Man, yeah,
Yeah.
they have them.
So good for them.
Listen, Koi Man, how many bags of cold patch you got?
I think actually SBS sells it.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen the asphalt there. So, all right, justice, real quick. Talking about, so the minister said that the number of accidents is actually fairly consistent with previous years, but that the severity of the accidents has gotten much higher. And for example, she said, I think they're talking about fatalities on the road. In 2024, there were 5. 2025, there were 3. 2026, and we're not halfway through, is already 7. So they're seeing indeed this spike in the severity of accidents. And I brought up to the minister, and apparently she hadn't seen this, and we talked about this on the previous radio show, that the Insurance Association has said, look, we're seeing also an increase in the severity of these accidents. And subsequently, I've seen letters going out to customers saying that they're planning to increase insurance premiums. And I brought up to the minister, this is really the consequence of lack enforcement. And we talked about this with Romy, right? That enforcement really is one of the challenges for the island. So because of lax enforcement, too many people are on the road without proper licenses, insurances, they haven't paid their road tax, things like that. And so I brought it up with the minister, and I said, look, just driving around the island, the amount of people that don't have their road tax stickers on their vehicles, that's lost income for government. But when you stop people for not having the road tax, it also allows you to check the ownership of the vehicle, the insurance, and things like that. So this is really this kind of shocked me. So apparently they didn't get enough of the stickers that for the road tax, and so the police were asked to hold off in enforcement because they didn't have enough stickers to issue to the people who have already paid their road tax. So as a consequence, they haven't been enforcing.
Now, wait a minute.
yeah,
Hold on a minute.
yeah. That's kind of
We didn't order enough stickers that say 2026 as evidence of the fact
the
that.
one that you stick in your car window, the one with the little green bar on it. Yep.
Okay, how the hell did that happen?
I know. You know next year. You already know 2 years ahead you're going to need stickers for, this year.
Well,
Yeah.
more importantly, you know how many stickers you have on the road? I don't know, 30,000
It's
stickers.
like 40,000, I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
but so order 10,000 extras.
Right.
Just in
that
case.
Was, that was and apparently, and this
They're
was
stickers.
off the air.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's an issue with that officers having the right cell phones, or maybe from the ministry, because they need to be able to scan the QR codes of the stickers to verify that they're correct. And I
don't understand.
And apparently, they don't have the cell phones.
What? I'm confused. What sticker? What cell phone doesn't do a scan?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they need a special app that ties them into the base. This was after the news conference, so apparently there's a couple challenges that are preventing the police department from doing controls. And I suspect also with Carnival right now, they brought in extra police officers to help with managing security for Carnival. So I suspect they're all spread pretty thin and heavily committed towards safety, geared towards the Carnival celebrations. So, yeah, so
Wow.
a little disappointing indeed. Tiat brought up about the rising fuel prices. I assume you see it as well when you fill up your car. There's indeed a big increase in fuel prices. And we got into a discussion about government collects fees on fuel, and I assumed that the fees are proportional to the cost of fuel. And apparently, the excise tax which they collect, which is, I think, just one of the taxes, is based on the number of liters sold. So whether the price for a liter is 2 guilders or 3 guilders, I think that the tax that they're collecting on that is fixed. So it turned into a bit of a discussion, both on air and off air, about how the fuel price is actually built up. Because if there's a fee or a tax related to the price of fuel, government could cap that. They could say, look, we'll put a maximum limit to it so that when oil prices spike, you don't get that increase in taxes. But surprisingly, at least in our conversation, I don't think they really know how the price is actually built up to when it gets to the consumer or to GB even. And I asked also, does GB have a negotiated rate? I mean, GB's got to be one of the largest fuel consumers on the island, and you would think that they would have some sort of a negotiated rate with Seoul, but apparently not. But they're going to double check if that's the case or not. So, I mean, like airlines, they hedge their fuel prices, right? They make contracts with their suppliers for a period out.
GB should be hedging this on the world market, with financial instruments. And
right, there are ways to hedge against these fuel spikes.
Let me do this. I'm way late. 8:57. Let me take a quick break. We'll come back and wrap up with Emil Lee, and then take care of the marine and tropical weather update. As always, brought to you by K Beach Club and Restaurant. More St Maarten Insights news that matters to you on the way. Welcome back to the program as we get ready to wrap up. Any final quick thoughts from yesterday?
Yeah, so wrapping up with Tiat, I brought up the concern I have about the increases in fuel prices, the impacts on cost of living. I don't know if you've seen in the news. Apparently, Europe is concerned about supplies of aviation fuel. Airlines are starting to cut back on flight schedules. Thankfully, most of it seems to be sort of local traffic. So let's say, Boston to New York, you might have 10
Drive.
flights a day. So
Drive.
maybe, yeah, so they'll drop it to maybe 5 or something, right? So they're trying to cut more of those overlapping flights. So hopefully we won't feel too much of an impact on those long haul flights, right? So if you have, one flight a day from Paris to St. Maarten, odds are they're not going to cut that. They're going to cut Paris to whatever, London, where there's a lot of competition and a lot of flights. So the concerning thing is, in terms of strategy that I got from the Ministry of Tiat, is really about just monitoring. They're saying so far the price increases haven't been that dramatic. It seems to be sort of within an acceptable range from their perspective. So in terms of strategy, there is nothing tangible in terms of an action. It is sort of a monitor, wait and see, which is sort of frustrating for me, because I think as government you should be more proactive, because this is going to hit. You saw this week the bus drivers were complaining, of course, because their biggest expense is going to be fuel, and so they want to see an increase in bus fares. But this is a temporary situation, hopefully, with fuel prices, and
We
it'll
believe
come
so,
back
yeah.
down. Yeah,
Always fingers crossed.
yeah,
Fingers
yeah.
crossed. Mr. Lee, always a pleasure.
Thanks.
I will. We won't see each other next week. We'll see each other
The week
after that.
after,
That,
yes. Yep.
and always a pleasure.
Thank you. Enjoy
Always.
it.
St. Maarten Insights, news that matters to you with Emil Lee. We will be right back. Meridian Tropical Weather Update is on the way.